Have you ever held on to something that felt like it had been waiting for you for decades? A forgotten envelope, a yellowed piece of paper, the kind of thing that seems to breathe when you touch it. That's how it was for me. A metal box, covered in dust, lost among old documents no one looked at anymore. And inside it, a letter. A soldier's last letter. Angola, 1987. I didn't know what I was about to open. I didn't know that that simple sheet of paper carried the weight of a story that time had, tried to bury. You know when something calls to you without explaining why? That envelope did just that. It had a torn stamp, the name of a battalion almost erased, and just below, a handwritten sentence. Don't open if you hear your name. The translation hit me like a punch. Don't open it if you hear your name. For a second I hesitated. It was just paper, but something about it felt alive. The sound of the wind, the silence of the room. Everything around me seemed to push me forward and say, "Open," and I opened. Before I tell you what was inside, you need to understand one thing. Angola, 1987, was no place to forget. It was a field of heat, dust, and echo, the kind of environment where even sound seems lost. Soldiers lived between fear and routine, writing letters without knowing if anyone would ever read them. Words that crossed seas, borders, and sometimes oblivion. But this one didn't get anywhere. The ink was still visible, the handwriting firm, but with trembling strokes in the final lines, as if the author were in a hurry. It was a letter that had never moved, a piece of time trapped, and now it was there, before me, after 36 years. As I held the paper, I noticed the smell of metal mixed with moisture. It's the kind of smell you never forget. It was the past imposing itself on the present, reminding me that some things don't die, they just wait to be remembered. And the more I looked, the more I felt that this letter didn't just want to be read, it wanted to be heard. Soldiers of that era wrote to survive. Each word was a thread of hope, a reminder that something still existed outside of war. They spoke of home, of promises, of names that might never be spoken again. But this letter, this one spoke of something different. It spoke of what happened after, of silence. When I read the first paragraph, I realized this was no ordinary letter. The soldier was describing the night he heard someone calling his name. The voice came from the woods, soft as if it were right beside him, but there was no one there. And what he wrote after that took my breath away. With each line, the sound of the paper seemed to grow heavier, as if the air around me were buckling. I read and reread the same passage over and over, trying to understand what he really meant. It was a mixture of confession, warning, and despair, and at the bottom of the page, a short sentence, written with a different pen, perhaps at another time. If someone opens this, tell them I was not alone. It was there that I realized that perhaps I wasn't either. The air grew thick. The sound of the wind seemed closer. That letter, forgotten since 1987, now breathed in front of me, and somehow it knew who I was. And this is where the story begins. Because when you read something that wasn't meant to be read, it's not just the past that returns. It's the present that begins to change. And in that instant, I understood. Some letters were not meant to be opened, but I had already opened it. Lost Letters and Diaries said, "If you've made it this far, it's because something in this story spoke to you too. Perhaps the mystery, perhaps the feeling that the past never truly disappears. And that's why I need you to help me keep these voices alive. Every comment, every like, and every subscription is what keeps these kinds of stories being told. These letters, these diaries, and forgotten records only make sense when someone hears them, when someone understands what lies behind the words. So, if this letter gave you chills, if you felt the weight of time or the chill of coincidence, like it now, it shows that this kind of content still matters. And tell me in the comments, what do you think really happened to this soldier? Do you think it was just fear? Or was there something waiting for him in those woods? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because every week I bring you a new story like this. Lost letters, forgotten diaries, and messages that time tried to erase. But remember, not every letter wants to be read. And sometimes when we open one, something also opens inside us. The letter found me, and from that moment on, nothing seemed still. The silence in the room now held a weight I'd never felt before. It was as if every sound, every movement of the wind, held a hidden meaning. I picked up the letter again. The bottom edge was blackened, as if it had been burned, but the top, curiously, remained intact. The contrast was almost symbolic, half consumed, half surviving the passage of time. I went back to reading. He was writing about the last night the platoon spent together. He spoke of a feeling they all shared, even without saying it out loud, that they were being watched. The grass moved even when the wind stopped, he noted, and when we looked, the ground seemed to breathe. I read that sentence slowly, trying to figure out if it was just a metaphor, but there was something literal about it. It was the way he described the impossible so naturally, as if the strange had become part of the routine. On the third day, the letter continued, the radio picked up a sound that wasn't coming from any channel. It was the sound of us, repeated, a little delayed, as if the echo spoke after we stopped speaking. The paper was slightly stained, perhaps sweat, perhaps rain, but the ink was still strong. The handwriting changed as the text progressed, as if the soldier were becoming more agitated. He mentioned the name of another member of the team, a sergeant named Leal. He said Leal tried to record the transmissions, but the tapes came back blank. The recorder would turn on by itself at night, he said, and when we rewound, all we could hear was our own breathing. I looked up for a moment. The room was the same, but the air seemed thicker. I continued reading. That morning, the sergeant said he dreamed of the sound calling me. He said it wasn't a human voice, but it seemed to know my name. It was impossible not to feel a chill. The following lines were shorter, almost as if the author were writing between pauses, listening, waiting. I tried to answer, he said, not with my voice but with my thought, and the sound answered back. It repeated what I thought, and laughed. I stood still. The idea of a laughing sound is absurd, but the way he wrote it made it seem plausible. It was the kind of story that mixes reality with delirium, fear with truth. He continued. After that, the radio stopped. The batteries were new, but they died. The wristwatch stopped too. The time was stuck at 3:17. I glanced at the wall clock in my living room. It read 3:17 a.m. Coincidence, of course, but coincidences have a strange way of choosing when they appear. I took a deep breath and went back to reading. When time stood still, he said, the shadows of the trees moved as if they were alive. The moon went out, and the heat disappeared. We tried to light the fire, but the flame fled from the wood. It was as if the air was afraid. The words were increasingly visual, as if he wanted to leave a record that could be understood, not just by reading, but by feeling. The wind returned, he wrote, but the wind spoke, not with words, but with rhythm. It called. It repeated my name until I forgot who I was. At this point, the handwriting trembled. The letters seemed almost falling apart on the paper. I could feel the despair hidden between the lines. Leal disappeared at dawn. We found his boots facing north, and next to him, a mark in the ground. It looked like a body lying down, but there was no body. The sound of the wind outside seemed to blow louder. It was just my imagination, I told myself, but every detail in the letter made the present vibrate in a strange way. The story was no longer just from 1987. It was happening as I read. I continued. The next few days were long. The sun didn't move as it had before. The compass rotated. The hill changed places. That last sentence reminded me of another story from another time. The letter from Afghanistan, where the map lied about the hill. The similarity was unsettling. 2 different wars, 2 different soldiers, decades apart, and the same kind of phenomenon. I began to wonder if these letters were connected, if what they called a coincidence wasn't something else, maybe a pattern, maybe a kind of echo that time can't erase. The letter from Angola continued. Last night, I dreamed that someone was writing my name in the sand. When I woke up, he was there, right in front of the tent, and there were footprints all around, but none led to him. I closed my eyes for a few seconds. The image was too clear. A name in the sand, a sound that spoke, the wind that laughed. Everything seemed symbolic and real at the same time, as if the soldier were trying to leave a clue for whoever would read it in the future. He ended that section by saying, "If this letter is read, know that the sound doesn't stop. It Remembers. And if you ever hear your name, don't answer. I stared at that last line for a long time. The letters were deeper, as if he'd pressed the pen down harder, as if he wanted to engrave the message not only on the paper, but on whoever read it. I folded the letter and looked out the window. The wind still blew, and it seemed more present now. It was as if the air itself had a consciousness. I remained silent for a while, listening. I heard nothing but breathing, but silence, when it is dense, also speaks. I returned to the table and left the letter there under the dim light. I touched the envelope again and realized there was something inside, something I hadn't noticed before. A small piece of paper folded in four, almost hidden between the folds. I carefully removed it. It was a cutout of a map torn from a larger document, and in the center of it, a hand-drawn red circle. Beside it, the same word written twice, Echo. That name again, Echo 7. I felt my body go cold. Apparently, he was trying to mark the spot where the sound started, the epicenter of whatever it was. I stared at the map, mentally comparing it to old images of Angola. The region was near a dense, isolated forest, where there had been almost no activity since the war. And the more I looked at the map, the more I noticed something strange. The point marked with the red circle no longer existed. In the current images, it was just a green void, with no elevation, no ruins, nothing. And in that instant, the thought struck me forcefully. What if what happened there wasn't just war? What if what he heard, what called his name, wasn't human? I kept that in my head for minutes, staring into space yet feeling everything. And the letter there, still open, seemed to breathe. When I came to, I realized I'd written something on the edge of the table with my fingernail. Without realizing it, I'd drawn the same symbol from the map, a circle, and within it, a dot. And somehow that made me stop, because the symbol seemed familiar. I'd seen it before, not on paper, but in a dream. The soldier's story was becoming intertwined with mine, and perhaps the sound that called him was still echoing. I stared at that small map cutout for long minutes. The sheet trembled in my hands, but it wasn't from the cold. It was from the weight of what I saw. It made no sense. The red circle pointed to a place that, on current maps, simply no longer existed. It was as if the earth had swallowed the spot, erasing all trace. And yet there, before me, the soldier had marked Echo 7 with such precision that he seemed to know someone would one day try to find it. I set the piece of paper on the table and leaned back in my chair. The dim light from the lamp made the map seem alive. The red ink glistened as if the fresh line were still wet. I ran my finger over it and felt the slight relief of the pen. It was authentic, ancient, and somehow urgent. I grabbed my phone and started searching for satellite images of the region. The contrast between the decades was unsettling. In 1987, the terrain showed elevation, a strip of dense forest, an elongated shadow. Today, it was just a patchy clearing. No sign of a military base, road, or camp. Just a grayish-green smudge. But the more I looked, the more I noticed something strange. At the edge of the image, at a certain angle of light, there was a circular reflection, a shape that seemed to change depending on the position of the cursor. And, I swear, it looked like a echo, a visual distortion like those left by signal interference. That captivated me. I zoomed in as far as I could and noticed tiny pixelated gaps in the center of the circle. And for a moment, the gaps formed something that looked like letters. I thought it was an illusion, but the longer I stared, the clearer it became. ECHO, the same word the soldier wrote. I suddenly put my phone away. My heart was beating fast, and I found myself laughing nervously. It can't. It can't be. But it was. The same term, the same symbol, and perhaps the same phenomenon. I needed to understand. So I grabbed a notebook and began to jot down every detail of the letter, trying to find a logic, a pattern. The dates, the times, the mentions of sound, the names. Everything seemed to orbit around this same idea. The sound that repeats, the name that returns, the echo that never dies. I reread the passage about Leal, the missing sergeant. He dreamed of the sound and heard his own name being called. It reminded me of something the soldier in Afghanistan also wrote. He talked about the wind saying his name when the map lied. 2 soldiers, 2 continents, different years. The same kind of story, the same feeling of being called. The same loss of reference between reality and noise. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it on the back of the paper. In the backlight, there were markings that hadn't been visible before. Very fine lines, like drawings made with a pen without ink. I ran the tip of my pencil over them to reveal the pattern. It was a set of lines converging toward a central point, like sound waves. Waves that emanated from the circle and spread outward. In the bottom corner, written in tiny letters, "The echo is the end and the beginning." That phrase kept ringing in my head. The echo is the end and the beginning. I thought about how sound is born, propagates, dies, and yet continues to exist, reflected somewhere. Maybe that was it. Maybe that soldier had seen or heard something that never stopped reflecting, something that kept calling, something that crossed time. Curiosity began to mix with unease. I was no longer just reading an old story. I was inside it. I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, but as I passed the window, I swear I heard something. A faint, distant sound. It could have been the wind. It could have been the street, but it sounded like a drawn-out whisper. 3 syllables. Long. Almost my name. I hurried back to the table, trying to laugh off my own paranoia. I sat down, looked at the letter again, and my heart raced. Because there, in the bottom corner of the page, where there had been nothing before, a small dark spot now stood out. I touched it with my finger. It was damp, new, it can't be. I held the light closer. It was a drop of ink or something similar. And most disturbing of all, it formed the outline of the same letter, E. Only this one wasn't his own. It was recent. The clock's sound seemed louder now. I glanced out the window again. No movement, just the faint reflection of the street. But inside the house, everything seemed to pause. The kind of pause that precedes the sound. And it was in that instant that I understood what he meant by, "When time stops, the sound awakens." I grabbed my phone and recorded a short audio recording of the room, just on impulse. When I played it back, what I heard made me freeze. Among the background noises, there was a constant hiss, but beneath it, a murmur repeated in a low cadence. "Echo, echo." I dropped the phone and stepped back. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. It could be interference. It could be coincidence. But it was too late to pretend I hadn't heard. I looked back at the map. The red dot seemed to vibrate in the light, almost as if it had a life of its own. I touched it lightly, and in that instant, the sound stopped. Everything went silent, heavy, almost solid, and it was in that silence that I felt something different. It wasn't fear. It was as if the very place I was in, the room, the table, the paper, had bent slightly, just enough for me to feel that time had changed its rhythm. I looked at the clock. 3:17 a.m. Again. I don't know how long I stood there, but one thing was clear. The letter wasn't finished yet, and somehow she was still writing what would come next. I picked up the envelope and looked inside. There was a second sheet, a sheet I hadn't seen before, tucked into the bottom, as if it had been deliberately folded to hide itself. I pulled it out carefully, my hand trembling, and the paper came away with a soft sound, almost a snap. It was as if it had been sealed by time. The page was smaller, thinner, and the text began abruptly, without greeting, without context. "If you found this, keep reading. The sound now knows who you are." My heart pounded so hard I could feel the blood pounding in my temples. That sentence wasn't meant for someone from 1987. It was meant for whoever opened it later. It was meant for me. "If you found this, keep reading. The sound now knows who you are." I read the sentence quietly, just to confirm I understood correctly. The intonation of my own voice felt strange in the air. It was as if the words refused to come out, as if each syllable carried a physical weight. The room grew colder. I didn't imagine it. I really did. The air change. The handwriting on the second page was different. It was still his, but there was a rush, as if he had written with trembling, sweaty hands. Some words were blurred, others crossed out, but the general meaning remained. He said that after the last night, the forest was never silent again, that the sound began to follow the group, even as they traveled miles from base. "It's as if the echo had stuck to us," he wrote, "as if the air had recognized us." The following sentences were almost incoherent. He spoke of voices coming from underground, of noises inside the helmet, of names being repeated on the radio even when the device was turned off, and finally a stray note without a period. Maybe the echo doesn't repeat. Maybe it learns. That sentence gave me chills, because it was almost philosophical and at the same time, absurd. The echo by nature repeats. But if it were learning, then it wouldn't be an echo anymore. It would be consciousness. I left the sheet on the table and got up. I went to the window. The world outside seemed still. No sound of cars, wind, or anything. And yet, inside the house, there was a low noise, almost imperceptible, like a weak electric current running through the air. It was the kind of sound you only notice when you try to listen to silence. I returned to the table and looked at the paper again. The soldier said he tried to escape the sound. We marched for days without direction. The compass spun, the map made no sense, and the wind blew the wrong way. He wrote that at night, the echo came from inside the tents, not outside. I began to hear my name under my pillow. I tried to imagine the despair, sleeping and hearing your own name whispered through the sheets, the kind of thing that breaks anyone's mind. The text continued, Leal is back, or at least something with his voice. He called us outside, but no one wanted to leave. The sound insisted. He said it was cold outside. He said he needed a fire. I stopped. I repeated those last sentences over and over. Did the sound want fire? Was it a code? A metaphor? Or was it, literally, something asking for warmth, presence, life? His pen faltered in several places. In certain places, the line disappeared completely, as if his hand had shaken too much or the paper was wet. And on the last legible line, he wrote, the voice called to me again. It wasn't his, it was mine. I dropped the paper. My body reacted on its own. A shiver ran up my spine and settled on the back of my neck. His own voice speaking to himself. The echo learning. It was impossible not to wonder how sound could absorb its listener. I grabbed my cell phone recorder again and turned it on. The noise was still there, that almost invisible hum. This time I let it record for a full minute. Then I turned the audio back on and put on headphones to listen carefully. For the first few seconds, nothing. Then a faint hiss. Then something that sounded like breathing. At second 47, a voice, weak, muffled, said something short. 3 words. You opened it. I paused the audio. I took off my headphones. My, heart sank into my throat. It was English, yes, and the words were clear. You opened. Reflexively, I glanced at the letter. The edge of the paper trembled slightly, perhaps from the wind, perhaps not. And for a moment, I swear the surface of the table seemed to emit a sound. The same deep, round sound that precedes a storm. I carefully pulled the paper away. Every instinct told me to stop, but curiosity is an ancient disease. I picked up the second sheet again and turned it over. On the back was a small hand-drawn circle with 7 dots inside, the same symbol I had unknowingly made on the table. And below it, a new sentence, in smaller letters. If you've made it this far, you're already on the 7th echo. I tried to understand. 7th echo? What did that mean? Was it a count? A stage? A cycle? I closed my eyes and began to remember everything. The first hiss in the audio, the sound repeating echo, the clock always showing 3:17, the circle, the dot, the reflection on the map. Everything seemed connected, as if the phenomenon itself had a structure, a sequence. I opened my laptop and started writing down what I knew so far, trying to organize my thoughts. I wrote, first card, Afghanistan. The map lied. Second letter, Angola. The sound called. Same pattern, distorted time, voices, echo, name repetition. When I reached the next line, I realized something. The 2 letters had been found almost the same month, in different military archive boxes, but with identical seals. This was no coincidence. It was a protocol, perhaps an operation, and both soldiers had used similar expressions. The sound learned, the map lied, time stood still. I returned to the letter from Angola. At the bottom, in tiny, almost illegible handwriting, was another note. Echo 7 is not a place. It is the point where everything repeats itself. That sentence destroyed me inside, because somehow it explained everything and nothing at the same time. Echo 7 wasn't a geographic coordinate. It was a condition, a state in which sound, space, and time meet and repeat the same moment until someone listens. I closed my eyes and imagined the soldier writing it, the pen trembling, the radio crackling, the voice calling. And now, decades later, I was reading the same thing at the same time, hearing the same noise. It was as if the echo had traveled through war, through paper, and through time to reach me. I looked at the clock, 3:17 a.m. Again, but this time the needle moved a little, slowly, hesitantly, and I felt something inside my chest, a chill coming from within, as if the air in the room had been replaced. The sound returned, louder, clearer, 3 sharp beats, then a pause, and then, again, a voice, deep, low, almost human. "Don't open the last one." I was paralyzed. The last letter. Was there more? The silence returned, but it wasn't the same. It was the kind of silence that remains after an answer. I looked around slowly, afraid to confirm what I already felt, that this story wasn't over yet, that the echo had somehow chosen me as the next voice. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. The voice echoed inside my head, repeating itself, as if each word had become trapped in the walls of the house. "Don't open the last one, don't open the last one." But what was the last one? Another letter? A reminder? A warning? I stood there, still, listening to the sound of my own heart trying to overcome the silence. After a few moments, I realized the clock had stopped again. The hands marked the same cursed number, 3:17. The light flickered. I didn't turn it off or touch anything. It just flickered, as if something in the air had changed density. The sound stopped, and for a brief moment, the whole house seemed to breathe along with me. I picked up the envelope and turned it upside down. No new paper spilled out, just the same old rusty smell, the same accumulated dust, but the bottom felt heavier now. I tapped it lightly with my fingers and heard a hollow sound, as if something were trapped between the layers. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a scalpel blade, a legacy from an old kit I used to open fragile documents, and returned to the table. Carefully, I cut the envelope's inner lining. The paper opened with a dry snap, as if releasing the air from a decades-old sealed space. Inside was a small, folded card, smaller than a photograph, stained and musty-smelling. On the back, a sentence written in faded blue pen. "The last one isn't written. Yet, the last one has not yet been written." For a second, I didn't understand. Then the meaning hit me. The last letter, the one that wasn't supposed to be opened, didn't exist yet, because the one who would write it would be me. I pushed back my chair. My entire body shivered. This couldn't be a coincidence. It was as if the soldier had known, decades before, that someone would open that envelope, that someone would hear the sound, and that someone would continue the cycle. The streetlights began to flicker. I opened the window and looked outside. The wind was rustling the trees, but the noise was unnatural. It sounded like a rhythmic whisper, like someone whispering within the wind. I quickly closed it. I returned to the letter. I touched the paper and felt that faint vibration again, the same one as before. The echo hadn't stopped. It was just waiting. I sat back down, took a deep breath, and, without knowing why, picked up a pen, not to write, but to hold. It was instinctive, as if part of me wanted to respond. And then, on impulse, I spoke out loud. "What do you want?" No response, just the sound of the clock trying to move, but failing. I asked again, louder. The silence stretched, dense, heavy, and it was in the midst of this silence that something fell from the shelf. An old, thick book, one I didn't even remember owning. It fell open, the yellowed pages face up, and right in the center, sandwiched between them, was a photograph. I picked up the photo carefully. It was a faded image, but still visible. A group of soldiers, 6 men, posing in front of a large radio in a makeshift camp. In the lower right corner, scrawled in pen, Echo 7, 1987. The soldier standing in the center, smiling discreetly, was the same one who had written the letter. The same face from the photo filed in the reports I'd seen earlier. But something was wrong. Behind him, in the shadows of the tent, between the torn fabric and the sunlight, an indistinct, almost human figure, with its face turned towards the camera, as if it were also posing. I looked closely, trying to figure out if it was a blur, a reflection, but the more I looked, the clearer its outline became. It had eyes, it had form, but it didn't seem made of flesh. I put the photo back in the envelope. My heart was beating too fast. I went back to the table and reread the sentence. The last one isn't written yet. It echoed like a curse. The soldiers seemed to foresee everything. The sound, the map, the echo, even the moment I would open the envelope. And now, with that photograph, the cycle was complete. It was as if each letter were a new stage, and each reader, a new author, someone destined to continue the story. I picked up the second sheet again. In the corner, in tiny, almost invisible letters, it said, "He's still listening. Don't look back when the wind dies down." I didn't look. I didn't want to test it, but I realized the wind had actually died down. The air felt heavier, like it had before the and without realizing it, I began to hear a low noise coming from the ground, like someone dragging something outside. I froze. Then, 3 slow knocks on the door. They didn't hit hard, but the sound echoed throughout the entire house. I dropped the pen. I waited. The beats repeated. 1, 2, 3. The same rhythm as the audio recorded earlier. I'm into eco. I walked to the door, slowly, my breath held. I looked through the peephole. Nothing, just the darkness of the hallway. But for some reason, the lamplight began to flicker behind me, and it was in that reflection that I saw it. The shadow of a man standing right behind me, motionless. I will come immediately. Nothing there. The chair remained in place, the paper on the table, the map spread out. But the air felt busy. I returned to my chair. My hands were shaking. I picked up the paper and tried to reread it. But the lines were different now. The text of the letter seemed to move, the words shifting position, as if the paper were breathing. And a new sentence appeared, written in the same handwriting, but which I swear wasn't there before. Now you understand. The sound just needs a new name. I dropped the paper. This wasn't just reading anymore. It was contagion. I grabbed the letter, the envelope, the map, everything, and threw them into a box. I sealed it with tape, quickly, almost desperately, but even with the box sealed, the sound didn't stop. I stopped to think about what the soldier had said. The echo is the end and the beginning, and I understood. The cycle didn't end when the sound died. It ended when someone heard it, and I heard. I put the box containing the letter, map, and photo away, sealed it with tape, and carried it down to the basement. The wood of the stairs creaked with each step, the dry sound echoing down the hallway. Each step seemed longer than the last. The air in the basement was damp, and the smell of rust and dust mingled with the smell of fresh duct tape. I placed the box in a dark corner, covered it with an old tarp, and stood watching. The echo wasn't coming from there. It was coming from me. My chest rose and fell too quickly, the sound of my breath hitting the walls. And that's when I realized the echo never needed space to exist, just someone to hear it. And now, it had it. I climbed back up, trying not to look back. With each step, the silence seemed thicker, as if the sound were gathering in the corners of the house. I closed the basement door and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. The clock started ticking again, but with an irregular tick, like an offbeat. I tried to distract myself. I opened my laptop, deleted my notes, and deleted the audio files one by one. But when I deleted the last one, the sound returned. The same low hiss now coming from the speakers. I unplugged the computer. The sound continued. It was low but constant, a vivid frequency, pulsing between seconds. I walked over to the table, removed my headphones, tossed my phone into a drawer, and closed it. The sound stopped for a moment, and then, somewhere in the house, I heard the dry crack of wood, then another, and another. It wasn't wind, it was rhythmic. 3 short beats, 1 long one, the same pattern as the audio. I ran to the light switch and turned on all the lights, but the feeling didn't change. The house seemed to breathe along with me. I grabbed the recorder from my phone. Yes, I said I put it away, but instinct is stronger, and began speaking, trying to keep my voice steady. Day 17. The sound is back. It's inside the house. It seems to be coming from the walls, maybe the ceiling. I need to confirm if it's acoustics, interference, or I don't know. I stopped recording. There was no point in pretending to be methodical. Fear isn't rational. I sat at the table and stared into space, until I noticed something different. The windows were completely fogged up. Inside, I walked over and ran my hand over the glass. and just as I cleared a small space, I saw the reflection of what appeared to be someone standing outside. The body froze. The figure stood motionless, distant, half obscured by the fog. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, but something told me it wasn't either. I stared at it for a few seconds, waiting for it to move, but it just stood there. The wind stopped. Everything went silent, and it was in that very silence that the figure disappeared. No footsteps, no sound, just emptiness. I closed the curtains, sat down again, and tried to breathe. I thought about calling someone, but what would I say? That the sound of a letter was following me? That an echo was alive? There is no way to explain the inexplicable without appearing to be part of it. I lay down on the couch and closed my eyes, trying to sleep. I don't know how much time passed, but I woke up with something cold in my hand. When I opened my eyes, my heart nearly leaped out of my chest. It was the envelope, the same one. I'd left it locked in the basement, but now it was there, on my chest. I opened it slowly, even though I knew I shouldn't. Inside, just a new, clean sheet of paper. No writing, no stains. But when the light from the lamp passed through it, the fibers of the paper revealed invisible words, as if they were engraved inside. I moved closer. The letters began to appear, slowly, one by one, and they formed the sentence, "The echo needs a voice." It was at that moment that I realized what was happening. The echo didn't want to scare me, it wanted to continue. It wasn't trapped sound, it was sound searching for a new body to inhabit. And I, by reading, listening, speaking, recording, had already given that to him. I jumped up, ran to the kitchen, threw the envelope in the sink, and struck a match. The fire leaped up, illuminating the paper. The flames consumed it quickly, but as it burned, the sound returned. This time coming from within the fire, a deep crackling, sound that sounded like a voice. Too late, too late. The fire went out on its own. The sink went cold. The envelope had turned to ash, but the letters were still there, engraved into the metal. I backed away, tripped over the chair, and slammed into the wall. And at that moment I heard the sound of my own voice from my own phone, inside the locked drawer, the recording. But there was one difference. I didn't remember saying those words. The echo must continue. I ran to the drawer and opened. The phone was on, the screen lit, the recording playing on a loop. I tried to turn it off, but the button wouldn't respond. The sound grew louder, distorted. I turned off the Wi-Fi, pulled out the battery, and still the sound didn't stop. The echo had found a new medium. I sat on the floor staring at the blank screen. The whole house seemed to pulse, and amidst the sound, something new began. Voices, many, overlapping. Men, women, children, repeating the same pattern. Echo 7, Echo 7. The sound remembers. I covered my ears, but the sound wasn't coming from the air. It was coming from within. And that's when I understood what the soldier meant by, "The last one hasn't been written yet." The letter is not the paper. The letter is the one who reads it. The voice on the recording became clearer, and for a moment it sounded like my own. Now you understand. Sound doesn't die. It changes form. I stood there, breathless. Everything I tried to erase only served to spread it. And perhaps the echo never came from outside. Maybe it's always been here, waiting for someone like me to hear it again. The pen was on the table, exactly where I'd left it, but now it looked different. The metal reflected the light strangely, almost as if it were vibrating. I sat and stared at it for a few seconds. The house was silent, but not the usual kind. It was the silence that comes after something alive breathes right next to you. I picked up the pen. My hands trembled. The blank paper waited, and before I knew it, I was writing. The words came quickly on their own, as if another hand were guiding mine. I found the letter, and now the sound has found me. I stopped. I looked at what I'd just written and felt the air around me shift. The lights began to flicker, the clock froze, and a low hum filled the room. The same one that was in the recordings, the same one that accompanied the soldier in 1987. I kept writing. He doesn't want silence. He wants remembrance. The pen scratched hard. Against the paper, the ink smearing the edges. The sentences formed at a rhythm I couldn't control. It was as if the sound was dictating what I should say. Amidst the noise, something tapped on the window. Once, twice, 3 times. The same pattern. I looked up, but there was no one there. Just the reflection of the room. And in that reflection, for a second, I saw my own face. But my mouth was moving before I could speak. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath, and I heard the voice. Now clear, sharp, inside my head. Right, the echo must continue. I tried to resist, but the pen kept moving. It wrote names, dates, disjointed sentences. Afghanistan, 2004, Angola, 1987, Eco 7. The sound still knows my name. The breath became shallow. The light flickered. The shadows on the walls seemed to move in time with the sound, as if everything were synchronized with the echo. And then, halfway through writing, I realized the words were changing. I wasn't writing a letter. I was copying the same sentences as the soldier, the same pauses, the same strokes. The handwriting wasn't mine anymore. I tried to let go of the pen, but my fingers wouldn't obey. Don't stop. The voice was cold, almost emotionless, but direct. And when I looked again, the page was almost full. At the bottom, a new sentence written in a different color, darker, fresh ink. Now, whoever reads will hear. The pen fell. The sound stopped. The light went out. I stood in the dark, panting, unable to move. And in the darkness, the sound returned. Not as a wheeze, but as human breathing from across the table. Thanks. The voice was identical to mine. I stood up slowly, but the sheet of paper was no longer on the table. It had disappeared. I looked around. Everything was quiet. No sign of the paper, until the phone vibrated on the floor. A new notification. File received, last letter WAV. The file name flashed on the screen, and for some reason, I knew I shouldn't listen, but I always open it. If you've made it this far, then you've heard it all. And if you heard it, you are already part of this story. Now, I want to know, what would you have done in my place? Comment below the sentence. The sound still knows my name, so I know you stayed until the end of this video. Leave a like because it shows YouTube that you want these stories to continue being told. And believe me, there are still many letters that time has tried to hide. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because every week I open another forgotten file, another voice that the world tried to erase. And before you leave, click on the video that's showing on the screen now. It's the next story, and maybe the next voice you'll hear.